Before I start, all of you got these calculations of your colors, tones, and bases. Treat them as fiction. Please. Please. Right? I mean, I want you to see what it looks like. I want you to see what a calculation looks like. You know, I want you to get a sense of that. But at the same time, I want you to treat it as fiction, because you really, unless you really know that you have accurate time, don't look at anything other than the color. Now, the color that you have there, that color is going to be very important for you, and those of you that are going to be participating in the color course, that's something you're going to find fascinating, because it's going to take you to a level that you can really have contact with, that's very important in the work that we do at the deepest level of design. In other words, there's tremendous therapeutic value, if I can use that kind of terminology, for being able to understand the motivations, the basic motivations, what colors each of the lines that we have. So when you're looking at the color there, that color is going to be very significant for you. It's probably going to be accurate if you have reasonably good time. If you think you have excellent time, you can probably feel pretty comfortable about your tone. But you know, unless you've got time to the second like I have for my children, you know, then you're really in trouble trying to say, well, that's my base. You know, I'm this base or that base or whatever. So, you know, nonetheless, you'll still run around saying I'm a first base, second. But however, you know, treat it as a fiction. It's a good fiction. Baseball's been belly good to me. Never mind. Maybe I try out my stand-up comedy routine today instead of teaching this course, okay? We come to perhaps what is the most interesting base, in the sense of what is most interesting to us. Because it's only when you get here to the fourth base, and it's one of the things that I noticed that was interesting, is that in running all of the base calculations for everyone, you know, there was not a lot of I don't think there was a single personality four. There was design fourth bases, but there wasn't any personality fours. And yet here it is. This is the cornerstone, if you will. This is the cornerstone of being human. And in that recognition that it's the cornerstone of being human, it is a yin-yang combination. Remember, we've looked at the yin-yin now, the third base, and here what we're looking at is the yin-yang. In other words, what we're looking at here is where the yin carries its power to meet the yang. It's in this combination here. And this is the combination that, in the old language of the I Ching, the yang-yang was the father and the yin-yin is the mother. You know, the yang-yin's the eldest son and the yin-yang is the eldest daughter. Now, one of the jokes about the Biverse is that it's during this era that we live in, that is the round we live in, this 19,000-year cycle that we're getting close to the end of now. It's during this round that the gender, if I can use that terminology, that the gender of the totality is being decided. Now, the fact is that, I'm sorry guys, but it's going to be a girl. In other words, it's going to be yinish. It's going to be more yin than yang. It's going to be the eldest daughter. In other words, this is what this child is, in a sense, the totality. So here when we're looking at the fourth base, not only are we looking at the cornerstone of what it is to be human in that sense, but more than that, we're looking at the basic equation that makes humanity possible, and it begins with the dominance of the yin over the yang. Now, of course, the first and second base always carry yang propaganda. And the third and fourth base, of course, are always going to carry yin propaganda. In other words, you know, they are going to do the best to present themselves in that sense. You know, the yang, when it meets the yin, says, yes, but we're still the yang, you know, we still got this penetrating. So here, in this combination that makes us human, here what you have is that you have a dominance of the yin. Now look, that speaks reams about how important it is for us to understand form. I mean, this is one of the things that's essential for us to grasp. And everything about the dimensional association to this four, all of that is the way in which form can move. You know, design is structure, structure is progress, progress is smelt, smelling is life, life is art. That's the progression dimensionally. This is all about structure. And that structure is that everything that's working in that structure is beginning out of the form. It's the yang that comes out of the form, not the yang that goes into the form. That's the difference. You know, the eldest son is the yang trying to penetrate the form and has a way of penetrating the form because form is part of the configuration. On the other side, the eldest daughter is very different. You know, this is the structure that says, I can allow penetration or not. But more than that, all the yang properties come out of the form, are conditioned by the structure. And if they're not conditioned by the structure, there's no progress. None. None. And of course, the most important thing about humanity, and you can see that in the impact of the 35th gate in design, that the most important thing for humanity is to move along the experiential way. Could you pass that back to Carolyn? This facet is called progressive. And one of the things to see about the place of humanity in all of this is that the place of humanity is that we are the driving force of the embodiment of progress. We are the embodiment of structure. Not simply the structure that is there inherent in the biology that we inherited from the mother, but our ability out of our very organized biology to create an organized environment around us, to create structure around us. In other words, it's not enough simply to be the form, but to be the form that takes advantage of the active yang force. And in that way, there is progress. That is, you keep on getting better and better refrigerators, you keep on getting better and better automobiles, and so forth and so on. In other words, you keep on changing the form, you keep on putting energy into the transition of the form, you keep on upgrading the form, you keep on moving the form. This is progress. This is humans. And of course, because of the depth of our capacity to remember, our ability to be able to establish structures not simply on the physical plane, but intellectual structures. You know, all kinds of structuring that can take place, because this is what order is all about. It's all about bringing about order. You know, this being human is being in the law and order business. It just is. Did you see the Elian Gonzalez hit? Was that a movie? You know, God bless America, eh? I mean, wow. That photograph of this guy with this huge gun and this little kid. Yeah, only in America. Order. Let's have some order here. This boy belongs with his father. Let's kill the bastards and bring the boy home. You know. See, human beings are endowed with this dimensional imperative to organize and order in order to be able to progress. It's just what we're about. And of course, that ordering can lead to all kinds of things. It can lead to the imposition of all kinds of limitations, punishment, restrictions, you name it. All of that is a byproduct of progress. I mean, progress. You know, in the name of progress, Stalin killed about 12 million Ukrainians who were farm owners. In the name of order, you know, out of that chaos, he could create one farm, you know, that was going to make all kinds of success and growing things and whatever. Order can be very frightening. But human beings, on the other hand, it is out of this order that everything is possible for us. Remember something. We are here to manipulate life. That's really something. You know, we are here to take the very power of the mythic gods that we have worshipped and become them. That's kind of spooky. You know, because that's what we're all about. We're here to create, recreate, manipulate life. This is our body, after all. It's all relative. We're here to be able to use our body. We're here to be able to know how our body operates and to be able to instruct that body. Remember all the crystal consciousness that is part of our solar system. This crystal consciousness is the design crystal of the totality. We're here to run the body. This is our body. We're here to run the body. And that means that we're here to run the whole body, not just this little corner where we can destroy the enemy or fight the nature or whatever the case may be. This is not about manipulating the environment that we cut down some trees and we plow the land and we build a house. This is a manipulation of the environment that gets to the point that we do not even need to act like the species that we are. We don't need to reproduce the way all other species do. All of those things. You know, whatever the current morality is about all of that, the fact of the matter is that where humanity is going is towards deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and more complex manipulation of the environment. You know, I watched a 4-minute thing the other day on Mars. This animation on how NASA has figured, after a $5 million blah, 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 how they have figured out how they can change the entire climate of that planet. And change the entire climate of that planet at a cost that's only about $10 trillion. Now, by the way, that is not a lot of money. I mean, yeah, it is. But I mean, in terms of changing the climate of an entire planet and making it habitable with oxygen is really quite something. But that's us. I'm not saying they're going to do that, or that it's practical to do so, or anything else. But what it is about this basic drive in us to be able to get to the point that we are not subject to the vagaries of the body, but that we can deal with it. We did that with health care. Do you know how long people suffered with teeth, diseases, all kinds of things? Century after century after century, dying young, poisoned in their own body, nothing to be done for them. Our ability to be able to find cures and healing for all of that, that's our manipulation. My son Jiva has no real human right, animal right to be alive. None. None. Any other time, any other place, this is a dead baby. This is probably a dead mother. This is a child that comes into the world 2.5 months early. I could put that whole child in my hand. And when I put him in my hand, there was 7 or 8 tubes and connections and wires going into him. And there was all this artificial nutrients and all of these things and drugs and hormones and pheromones and this and that, and to reproduce the very environment of the womb, to provide every single thing that that child should have had naturally in the womb. All of that was being provided in a glass box. You know, I look at my boy now and it's like, yeah, okay, he's a normal kid, he's a human being. And every time somebody says to me that it's bad to manipulate the environment, I think, you killer, you want to kill my kid? You see, there's all this silly morality in all of this. It's our job to be able to do that. We are all graced in our society with an 84-year lifespan. It's incredible. And it's because we do manipulate the environment. And if it wasn't for that manipulation of the environment, we would not have that kind of longevity. You know, you'd still be in the woods behind some city in the subcontinent with 8,000 people shitting at the same time in the same holes. You know, it's an amazing thing, this gift in us. And you see, that's what this fourth base is all about. This is about the Übermenschen, you know, the Superman. You know, this is about realizing that we are really something. And of course, this is the great base of vanity. It's full of vanity, because after all, this is the facet of ego. This is the ego of the whole. This is the ego of the totality. And it's interesting to understand that ego is a dimension. It's a dimension. You know, thy will be done. The power of the ego. You know, my will. My human will. This is not a place where you're going to find spirituality. You know, you're not going to find religion. You're not going to find any of that. What you're going to find is the deep, deep, deep human process. And that human process is everything has to be ordered. Everything has to be in the right place. Everybody has to be organized. And we're the best. We're human. We're better than all of them. We've been able to kill them all, control them all, beat them all, feed off of them, use them, abuse them. This is the base that says, I'm at the top. I'm at the top of the food chain, baby. And we have to get there. You see, human beings were not meant to be symbiotic. You know, this is the whole thing. You got all these people that got this natural trip, eh? The New Age is full of people with their natural trip. Let's be like the American Indian. Let's all be back there down on the range, living as one with nature. I mean, yeah, sure, we've sentimentalized that, propagandized that, we've turned it into a beautiful story, blah, 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 all of that stuff. Nature knows that we don't belong there. I mean, nature's afraid of us. I mean, it is, after all. With good reason is right. We're a terrifying lot. We don't fit into all of that. You know, watch somebody build a house in America, and you really understand that. We don't fit into that. That's not what being human is. Being human is being above everything. We are in God's image. It says in the damn book of Revelations that if you're a dog, you don't get into heaven. It's in it's right there. It says if you're a dog, you don't get into heaven. Pisses me off. Why don't dogs get into heaven? It's the fourth base. We are the ones that are great. We're the best. It's so funny. And you see, it's our truth after all, folks. You know, the ant gets in the way and we step on it, and, you know, we got our spray cans. And I mean, see, being human is not about fitting in to the rest of nature. It's about transcending it. After all, in the end, what we have is zoos. We have botanical zoos. Our little gardens, our little imported plants that we stick in the corner of the house. We have our animal zoos so that we can remember what lived here on this planet. But we don't belong to any of that. I've lived in nature a long time. I've lived in the country a long time. I watch how other species deal with each other, how the lizard deals with the cat and so forth and so on. They've all got their place in a common ground there. And then there's these bizarre humans. And they're totally different. My struggle against vanity is a joke. That's my Don Quixote game. I tell everybody, get rid of your vanity. To be human is to be built on vanity. It's all vanity. The only advantage we have in the recognition of that, it's 1/5 of the mechanical process and gets integrated into the rest. But we cannot escape that. And by the way, when I say these things, I'm not against us being at the top of the food chain. I have no problem with humanity's vanity in the sense that it's ready to challenge nature itself, life itself, creativity itself, all of that. Because I know that's the natural place for it to go. It doesn't mean that as it's going there along the way that that's something to really appreciate or enjoy, because so much of it is so ugly. That we are designed to dominate, manipulate, and control, to bring order. Look at a farm. Just about every place you look, other than those places where it's just not possible to do so, not only have we ordered our own personal environments, but we ordered the nature around us. It's like taking a drive through Switzerland. It's frightening. It's frightening. The forests are groomed. I grew up in Canada. You go into the woods, there's detritus there that's been there 1,000 years. And then you drive along and there's this beautiful landscape, but it looks like somebody painted it. I lived in the countryside in Germany, and there's guys that are paid to come through the woods twice or 3 times a year, and they clean out the whole thing. And it looks like somebody swept between the trees. It's amazing. And you look at that and you think, gee, that's our job. We order everything. We put everything in its proper context. We give everything its name, after all. It's us that's making something out of these anythings. We call it this and we call it that and we name it this, and then we say, okay, you got this name, you go in this box. And you have this name, you go in that box. The biological and the botany people and all these people, they're going nuts now, Because they all have to rename everything. Because the names don't work anymore. So now everything has to be coded genetically. So they have to change all of these classifications of all of these creatures. That's us. To put them all into their order so that we know where everything is. And by doing so, we automatically have superiority. Instantly. That's how, the police and all of these different kinds of enforcement agencies operate. They control you, and by controlling you, the moment that they control you, that's the moment they can manipulate you. That's us. We're always doing it. We've always been doing it, and we're going to do it forever. The fourth base isn't going to go away. It isn't going to be human anymore. It's going to go through a transition within itself, a mutation that's going to take place. But the quality of that, in other words, the ability to be able to find self, this is the biggest joke of this base. After all, this is where self is. It's not simply a facet of ego, but this is where the self is. That is the concept of human self. that is something that is very, very, very strange. This human identification, with itself, with the self. One of the things that we saw in looking at the yin-yin is we saw the importance of being able to get resources in order to be able to have security, and at least to be able to have security in 7-year cycles. And remember, here we're still dealing with what is a yin force, in the sense that it is a yin dominating force. And resources here are very, very important. But the resources here are different. Human resources are designed to be available through other agencies. In other words, we're here to get our resources by manipulating other forces. You can see that, for example, how that was finally extended into the very human family itself in what we've come to call slavery. In other words, the human is actually designed to have everything else do its work for it. Think about that. It's not that we have not started to approach that. We have. Automation is an example. Automation is the classic example of human beings finding a way to manipulate the environment so that they don't have to do the work that something else does. That instead of having factories full of people, that you have all these funny robots that are going back and forth and doing their business. Again, it is part of what it is to be human to take advantage of any lower form, in order to gain resources from it. The plundering of the New World by Europeans. In other words, that all of these traits that are there to bring us to the point of our superiority in that sense also bring obviously all kinds of negative consequences historically in the way in which we operate. That it's always going to be there as a part of us, that we are always going to be involved in making sure that we can control everything. What do you think our curiosity points us towards? Why do you think we want to know what the genome is? You think we want to know that just because it's fun to know? I mean, people, if anybody thinks that that's pure science, they're nuts. This is the greatest manipulation program that's ever been attempted by humanity. We have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of scientists that are all working so that we can figure out how to manipulate our own genetic code. This is what we're about. Do not be afraid. You see, the yin is darkness. It is the forces of darkness. It's not the forces of light. And if you take away the morality of light and darkness, the one thing to understand is that the forces of darkness, that these are heavy physical forces. My experience with the voice was a heavy physical experience. It wasn't light. It's form. It's not about whether that's good or bad or whatever. But it's about understanding the intensity of that. This is the blackest base. The mother generates life, and that life can be anything. It can be life of light and light of darkness and all of those things. But it is the eldest daughter. It is here in this fourth base that the real horror of the yang can emerge. Out of the organizing of the yin. Gas chambers. Incredibly well organized. Just a way to be progressive. We get rid of the lower forms because the lower forms get in the way so that we can continue to become supermen. We find that kind of dialogue frightening. Today, it would be terribly politically incorrect for anyone to talk about creating superhumans at the expense of other life forms. And people wouldn't like that. It's what we are. It's what we are. And you see, by the time we get enough depth, we're going to be able to have the opportunity to turn the power of that outward, not against each other, but in terms of our ability to be able to manipulate our environment. Because if we don't get down to that, that's the big job, is to manipulate our environment and ultimately to be able to manipulate the entire form. That's what we're here for. You can see where the vanity of that becomes uncomfortable. You can see why everybody was running around saying, we are in the image of God, you know. We are all this. We are the most important thing in the universe. It's only us. All of that stuff. And of course, in the last 300 years, everybody's going, You know, I love watching these shows now where there's some jerk with a nice voice describing some galaxy with 8 zillion stars going, and of course we know, that there's probably, maybe 100 million planets, and they go on and on and on and on and on about all of that because it's politically incorrect to say that we're the center of the universe. I mean, it's politically incorrect. But we are. But we are. We just are. The crystals that we all carry, all of those crystals, that's what this is all about. That's what this life is all about. And we are at the center of all of that. And we're not going to find anything out there. It's here. It's always been here. And all of that out there is actually very close to us here. We simply have to learn how to deal with it, and we will. By the way, we won't really deal with it as humans, obviously. The best that we can do as humans is get to the point that we are able to keep ourselves going despite the fact that we should be extinct. I mean, that's what everything is about now. Everything. That's why we have this whole dilemma about abortion and the right to life and all of these things. This is just the way all of that filters out into the mundane plane. There's a great struggle going on, and the struggle that's going on is that we have, it's like one of those time tests that people give you sometimes for certain kinds of jobs where you got to answer all the questions in a certain amount of time. We've got a real time test going on. And that time test is we have to figure out how to make life before we can no longer do it ourselves. In other words, we have to learn how to keep our species going and be able to keep it going despite the fact that we should be dying out and become extinct. I mean, that's our job. We're not dinosaurs. We're really cool. We can actually figure this stuff out. And we will. And we will. That's our whole thing. Just like my child, who should not be in the world, humanity is going to keep on hanging on. Because you see, we're not like anything else. We're not. And we're going to transcend that. We're going to recreate ourselves in our own image. In our own image, not in God's image. We're going to recreate ourselves in our own image and keep us going despite everything. Well, until certain changes take place that kind of progression can't handle. The whack that'll come, in about 1,500 years, that'll squash all that and turn it into something else. And all those first bases will go flying off to the sun, and the rest of you will keep on trucking. The facet is called ego design. And you can also see that here the quotation is I design. It's not I am a design. It's I design. I've mentioned that a couple of times in some of the stories I've told. I had a friend of mine, Frank in Ibiza, And when I first met him, we went out to the beach one day, and he gave me some very strong LSD, and the two of us were flying along. All of a sudden, he turned to me about 3 or 4 hours later, and he looked at me and he said, "Ra," he said, "I'm God." And nobody had ever said that to me, you know? I mean, I'd never met anybody that had the audacity. You know, it was an incredible thing. And here's this guy, he was really serious. I could see that he's really serious. And then to close it all off, he said to me, "And Ra, when I go, it all goes with me." You know, it's us. That's in each and every one of us. It's in each and every one of us. And it's true in a way for each and every one of us. When we go, it does all go with us. It all does. We maintain our piece of the Maya in our life. But when we die, it just all, you know, we take it all with us. I take all of you with me when I die. You know, it's just the way that it works. It's part of the joke. But that we are godly. You see, we never would have had messengers on this planet who claimed to have been able to actually handle the power of the gods and the forces, unless we were just like them. Because we are. We are. You know, for years I've been telling people that if you live out your type and your authority, that you'll find your mythology. And that you'll get to live out your mythology. Because we are mythic in proportion. It's not about the vanity of saying, "Gee, aren't we great?" You know. It's to really recognize how gifted we are as a species. And to see that there is a very, very, very special way we're going. Think about the universe. Think about neutrinos. This incredible thing. Eh? And everywhere in the universe, there is an ocean of neutrino grid that is generated by all the stars of the universe. And one planet. And one planet. Earth. And not naturally. It started in Alamogordo, just down the road. We ignited an atomic bomb. We let off neutrinos. We're producing neutrinos every day through our atomic fission and fusion and all of that stuff. And these atomic plants, they're all producing neutrinos. Think about what that actually means. The whole universe is being programmed by a stellar field. It's being programmed by the neutrino production of the stellar field. And all of that is a set mechanism moving in the formula. And then there's us. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, here we are, we're putting out our own information. We're not processing neutrinos. Please understand that. That's not processing them. It's not having the neutrino from a star come through you, changed by you, out through you, so that you change the quality of it going out. That's filtering. We as a species, we're putting out our own neutrino stuff, independent of those stellar fields, independent of our own sun. See, we are different. We're already beginning to program the whole directly. Imagine what it's going to be like when human beings figure out, and they will, how information is stored in neutrino streaming. And they will. And these atomic facilities that we have, they may never again be used for heat, to generate electricity. They'll generate neutrino information. And they'll put that neutrino information out into space at nearly the speed of light in every possible direction. You see, that's a very different movie. That's us. That's our job. We're going to do all of that. We're going to figure out how all of that works. We're here to order it all. That's our job. Bring all of this together. So it's not, I am a design. It isn't. You see, that's the basic resistance that we all meet in a human being. I design. It's up to me. I do it. I make it happen. I'm God. It's my universe. You know, people used to say to me, you know, that they had a choice, and I would say to them, gee, I never met God before. You know, it was my joke. You know, this is all built into what it is to be human. I design it. I make it happen. I control it. I manipulate it. I bring the progress. It's me. You know, being human.
Where is the yin in that?
This is the whole point. Look, the yin is the pure yin, nothing more. But the moment that you get to the eldest daughter, the moment you get to this combination of the yin yang, what this is that the yang working through the yin. Remember, on the yang side, it's the yang going into the yin and trying to penetrate the yin. But here on the yin side, it's the yin taking advantage of the yang, using the yang energy as it goes out, and using the yang energy to bring about the progression in form. That's why it can be so powerful. And remember, this is the great power of what the being that is going to be the result of this whole evolution, that's going to be its great power. This is going to be a great form that's going to be able to use yang energy and take advantage of it. Remember that the yang here is under control of the yin. It has to operate through the form that the yin provides. You know, so the yang is there, but it's being controlled in that sense by the yin force. And this again is where we have this sense of darkness. It is on the yang side, the eldest son is the one that always claims that they speak to God the Father. They're the ones that say, hey, look, let me fuck you. Let me put my light in you. You know, they're trying to control the yin. They're trying to penetrate the yin. They're trying to change the form. They're trying to penetrate the form. On this side, it's very different. On this side, the yin has the control of the yang and is using that energy to get things done. Not simply to sit still as the form principle, but to be the form principle in action. In action, moving. The fact that this facet is about I design means something very important about the way in which we look at progress, generally speaking. In other words, we have to begin to see that even though we have ourselves questions, personal questions within our own time and place about the value of any progress, the pollutants that might be a byproduct that for us in our lifetimes can be uncomfortable, can be in fact disease carrying, whatever the case may be. We don't know in the end the value of that we run into difficulties in the sense that we build a morality around what design is good and what design isn't. You know, it's like the Chinese government right now. They want to build this enormous dam over the Three Rivers project. And it's one of the great ecological messes. You know, you're displacing 1.5 million people. You're killing off tons of life, all kinds of stuff, so that they can have consistent electricity and so forth and so on, and supposedly be able to control flooding in the southern basin. There's a lot of people who will say, that's a terrible design. You know, don't do that. Don't design that. Don't do that. Don't make that progress happen, because that isn't going to be good for us. And of course, there's going to be forces on the other side that say, we have to have this kind of progress because this progress brings electricity, it brings luxury, it brings refrigerators, it brings, you know, blah, 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 all of those things that the people need. So one of the basic human dilemmas that we have is that out of our morality, we have a constant competition between what's allowed to be designed or what the culture or civilization considers appropriate to be designed at this particular time. And we've been going through that obviously for thousands of years. What it does is that it takes away from the objective view of what progress is about. And remember that we've made that a dirty word in the last 50 years. I mean, we really have, eh? I mean, for our generation, you know, for those of us raised in the West, progress has been something that we have, it's kind of backwards decadence after all. You know, we can only afford to dump on progress because we benefit from it. And if we didn't benefit from it, we'd be screaming for it because we'd want it. I mean, you know, it is the way things are. It's important for us not to get moralistic about this quality of progress in humanity because it's absolutely essential for us. I mean, what's human design after all but an attempt to order humanity mechanically? I mean, that's what it is. You know, it's clear to me that if everybody lived out their design, we would have a very orderly, we would have a very healthy, cooperative, collaborative environment in which we could all live in peace. It's very clear to me. That's the job, is to try to bring order. That's a very human thing for us. Yet at the same time, to bring that order, you know yourself what resistance you meet. You meet the resistance of this very fourth base that says, wait a minute. You don't give me my design, I design. You don't tell me I have no choice, I have choice. I have choice whether I'm going to be allow you to manipulate me or not. All of this relative consciousness that comes in the world of ignorance. And you see what happens because of that is that because we don't have a clean, objective view of the value of progress, we don't have a proper way of seeing what progress is important for us to put our energy behind. And that's what's important. It's not about the age-old fight of whether you should build another building where there was once a piece of wetlands or blah, 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 or all of that stuff. It's about seeing that we need to put our energy into those progressive things that are truly for us to be involved in. My support, for example, of the scientific investigation of the genome. Now, at the same time, there's vast movements already, particularly in this country, because this country breeds movements and associations and all that stuff. You got all kinds of people that want to stop this. They want to stop it. They don't want anybody to really know how it works because they're afraid they're going to be left behind. They're afraid that they're not going to get the genetically engineered child that happens to be able to play Mozart at 4. They're afraid that they're going to be left out, and particularly those that are at the low end of the economic scale, because as we well know, genetic engineering is going to be for the rich first. And it isn't going to be that the rich are going to get richer, the rich are going to get smarter, stronger. I mean, we're into some interesting times. And when you're dealing with people that are being resistant to this kind of investigation, you're really getting at the core root of what we're about. You see, you're dealing with the fear threshold that's the most important fear threshold we have. It's the thing that shatters God in the end. Remember, I'm not against God. Whatever gods may be. What I do know is that the Biverse was created. What I don't know is who those two were, whatever that was. What I'm talking about is the shattering of the concept of God in the relative context that we have and have had historically within our framework. You see, the moment that we can really have all that genome mapped, the moment that not simply the white-hatted doctors who say, we have found the cure for cancer, we have found the cure for this, or whatever the case may be, but the black-hatted ones, that for, pocket dot-com billionaires are producing wonderful children for them, the moment that evidence comes out, and it will, and it isn't going to take that long, that's when we're going to have a big, huge bubble burst between those people who are going to fall apart because the Godhead collapses the moment we create life. It just does. The biggest moral question about cloning a human being is religious. It is the biggest moral question. It's the only question. Well, God made us. This is not blah, blah, blah. It was like the first test tube baby. I remember that ages ago. This little girl, Brown in England, this first test tube baby, and all the religious fanatics in England going, this is a child of the devil and blah, blah, blah. She's a sweet little girl, by the way. We'll get to the same point. And of course, this is a very, very important threshold. This is the point at which what I'm talking to you about the transcendence of humanity to the point in which we leave behind our reliance on God, that we take the responsibility, not that God has the responsibility. We take the responsibility to be the maintainers and creators of life. Wow, that's a big step. That's a big step. That's what we're all about. And that's what our movement in space has been all about. What we've looked at, as a matter of fact, most strongly since the 1600s, since 1610, 1614, when we entered into this particular part of the round that we're now in, this is when all of this stuff really started to hum and fly. We started to really be able to know how to organize. Do you know how many traffic lights there are in the world? Oh, it's really incredible. There weren't any 100 years ago. There were none. All these roads, all this ordering, all this interconnecting, all of this, and then extended into what we have now, which is the 21st century internet, web, blah, 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 networked, all of this stuff. Wow, are we moving? And you see, so much of humanity is terrified because they think that we are disobeying God, that we're sinners, that we're damned. They really think that this is all a horror. I mean, remember that we're at the time in which the only spiritual movements that really have power are fundamentalist. Look around you. Only the radicalization of faith is popular now. The mainstream is all kind of ho-hum and blah, blah, and dying. What you have is the last stand. You got the last stand of all these spiritual religious fanatics. Mohammed was right, Buddha was right, Jesus was right. They're all blah, blah, blah. My God's better than your God, all that stuff. That's what you're getting. And of course, this last stand is there because of where we've moved in our progress. If you go to Afghanistan and you talk about progress, they hate it. They hate it. My God, what they're doing to their women there. It's unbelievable. It is just unbelievable. They're putting them back into the Stone Age. A woman can't go out of the house unless she's accompanied. And she has to be obviously totally covered. She cannot be educated. She cannot go to the hospital, for Christ's sake. That's the fanaticism of fundamentalism, and it is this reaction to what comes with order, that the order breaks down all those quirky little things that don't fit in, that don't work, and that without the order, you don't have success. I watched personally, because I was living in Central Europe at the time. I was there when the wall came down, and I watched the German government of the time, because they had to, make a deal with Gorbachev and invest tens of billions of Deutschmarks, enormous, incredible sums of money, a kind of payoff in a sense, and pumping that money into the Soviet Union. Of course, a lot of other people did the same. A lot of other countries that were wealthy did the same thing. And when all of that was going on, I thought, that's a very nice present, but it's like a Christmas present. It's useless. And it's useless for only one reason. One of the funniest things that I saw was that on the nightly news in Germany during the coming down of the wall, when the moment of unification came, the German news, like our evening news, the German news that comes on at 7:00 at night, it always comes on with a map. Like American news, you see, it comes on with a map of Germany. And of course, all of a sudden that map looked very different because you now had Eastern Germany. And in all of the gas stations, suddenly you had maps that were being sold so that you could, have maps for the eastern side because they hadn't been available in 40 years. So I bought one of these maps. It was such a joke. And I bring this map back, and the map goes from most of Western Europe, Germany, to about the middle of France. And it goes from the central part right to the Russian border. So you've got, Poland and you have Czechoslovakia, and, you have all of these border countries along with what was East Germany. So I open up this map. And on the West German side, it looks like the neural activity in a human. There's roads everywhere, there's lights everywhere, there's service stuff everywhere. And then 1/3 of the size of the whole country, there's this map, and it's just green. There's maybe 3 roads. You see, progress is liberating. It just is. We get more and more concerned about our privacy and all of that stuff, which is a real joke for me because we are one. And in the end, there is no privacy. It's not possible. But it's so, being human, what it means to be human. It's not about us being one with nature. It isn't. As politically incorrect as that is. And as I say that, recognize something in that. I couldn't live anyplace else but in nature. It happens to be aesthetically what I like. And I love all of that primitiveness in that sense and the simpleness of all of that. And I've lived the romance of that in my life. But I'm a real good example of a human who goes about the business of organizing and ordering others at a vast scale. I'm part of all of this. I'm part of this mechanism, and it is clear to me where our direction is. I just want to make sure that, I can't make sure of that. I would like to be able to see that we get there where. I would like to be able to see that we get there according to our type, according to our nature, so that what we do manipulate is manipulated correctly. That those things that we manipulate are the correct things to manipulate. It's not about stopping it. It's like me dealing with emotional people. Be emotional, but be emotional when you're clear, please. Okay? It's not about that. We must manipulate the environment, but it has to be correct. That's our whole program, and we have to get to that point. This brings us to the last three aspects here that I want to discuss. What we've looked at each of these bases as we've gone through so far. And as we went through, we saw that we started with where. We started with the first base. We started with, where everything is. When we get here to the fourth, what we get to is why. It's one of the reasons in my discussion about the correctness of manipulation, because it is our role to manipulate, that it's very important that we know why we're doing that manipulation. Why is very, very, very important to humanity. For years I had a joke. I love word games, anagrams, all these silly things. And my name for Earth was Why Planet. It was a great no choice pun, why planet, don't plan it, But this is why planet, because everybody asks why. Aside from why planet, don't get into planning things because the plan is there. This is why. Why is the sky blue? If you have a child, you know that one of the first intellectual moments of their life is the phase they go through when they ask you why about everything. Everything. To the point at which you're ready to go totally stark raving mad. Not only that, but it's often embarrassing that they ask you things that you really don't know. Children continually ask their parents why the sky is blue, and they really don't know. It's fascinating, the bullshit that kids get, as feedback. And those are the kind of questions, simple ones like that. Why is the sky blue? And the parent goes, don't ask me questions. They don't know. Why is very important to us. Why am I the way I am? Why is the world the way it is? Why is life the way it is? Why do I suffer? Why do I have to suffer? Why do I have to work? Why do I have to go to school? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do that? Why? Why planet? Human beings live on why planet? And so one of the things for us is that there is a magic here. The magic is when you don't have to ask why. This is human enlightenment. See, that's the whole thing about surrender. In surrender, there's no question. There can't be a question. I can't say to the gods, why me? They'd beat me up, hurt me if I did that. It's foolish. In surrender, there is no why. There just is. Just is. That's justice. Just is. That's what everything is. And you cannot get to the point of just is until you know essential answers to the human questions of why. Why am I here in the world? And why am I the person that I am? And why do I act the way that I do? And why do I have this kind of life rather than that or the other or whatever? That's us. Why? And of course, those whys become really incredible. Because in exploring and seeking out those answers, we get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper control and order in the way in which we operate in the world, and greater opportunities to be able to manipulate. This why is an incredible thing, and we're born with this why. And one of the things you'll notice about the way in which we've evolved in our civilization is that today you get rewarded for your answer. Now, that was not always true. Not only wasn't it always true, but most people didn't even know there was a question around. Because there was no generalized education, there was no generalized intellectual development of humanity as a whole. It only belonged to certain classes at the top. That you see this whole pursuit of why, this is what it's all about. And when you get to that point, design. See, design can't answer all the questions for you. It doesn't have to. It's not important. I always have this process. I always remind you of it, that whenever I'm teaching the minutiae of human design, there's always a part of me that's under stress because I know it moves people further and further and further away from the basic truth of what human design is, which is type. There isn't anything else to start with. The fact that, there is a cadre of students who are well educated and know all of this stuff, it's all very nice. But we have a vast, unwashed humanity who doesn't know anything about it and will never have either the patience, the talent, the interest, the openness that you have to explore new knowledge. These are people that are caught up in the essence of their lives and caught up with the vanity of they being the designers. And it's essential for us to see that because we have the privilege of this knowledge, that our work is not about the deep, other than for our own personal development. It's about using the privilege of being in the geometry of receiving this knowledge to get it to other people. And I don't care how you get it there. Whether you get it there as a professional who professionally takes somebody through what is a correct analysis, or whether you're just a friend that says, look, this is your type, do something about it. It doesn't matter. It's about getting that information out to people, because that's what it's all about. You see, the why that human design answers is the most important why we have. And it's the only one that matters. Why am I the way I am? Nobody's comfortable with themselves out there. Nobody. And nobody has the answer to that. Nobody. That's the beauty of this knowledge. It says to you, this is why you are the way you are. And this is what's part of the way you are the way you are. And this is how it works. And this is what's not the way you are. It's so simple. And you see, that question's the main bug. All the other stuff is just intellectual pursuit. It's part of us needing to get down to the minutiae. After all, I'm teaching you this so the science is recorded and has a basis. The minutiae down here, you want to play black magician down here at the base level? Boy, can you ever. It's all about manipulation in the end. All knowledge is that. I used to have people come up to me in the first years of human design and say, this is dangerous knowledge. Yeah. What knowledge isn't dangerous? It's all dangerous. Ignorance makes everything dangerous. Continually. But you see, that one answer, it's at the core, because that one answer heals the dilemma of this facet. It heals the ego. I'm an archetype. Paddy Pata, I think, got me this great hat that says Ego Manifester. It's me. I'm a pure archetype of the ego. Not only that, I have my ego being activated by an Aryan sun and an Aryan moon. I'm a classic ego manifester. And before I met this knowledge, I lived out the darkest aspects of ego. The darkest aspects of ego. And I know them well. I know them really well. I know how ugly ego and vanity can be. I know how overbearing it can be. I know how uncomfortable it can make people. I know what it can do to them, and I've done it to them over and over and over again. And I know what it is to stand on the false platform of your ego only to sink into the sand. I know all that. But I know something else. In my privilege in this life, I've had 13 years of dealing with my ego as an energy and not as a problem. And as an energy, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. You see, it is our will that matters. In the end, will is a dimensional field. It is the field of ego. And if you think about it in another way, in a larger way, you can imagine that it's here that we get our heart. It's here where we have the stomach to live in the totality. All of those things are here in this fourth base. But this question, why? That's what human design is here to answer. And if you answer that first basic question, why am I the way I am, you have progress. You just have progress. And you have the healing of that ego, because you see, I know many of you in your stories. You see, the moment that you meet surrender, everything about you gets clean. Everything. Your enemies forget that you're the enemy. It all changes. Those that rejected you don't even know why they rejected you anymore. It all changes. It's a remarkable thing that happens. And of course, what happens is the recognition inside the individual who can experience that is that, hey, that's not me doing that. I mean, as an ego manifester, people always think that I'm doing stuff. Now I'm busy, but I'm not doing anything. I mean, I'm really not. It's not like I set out to do anything. Everything happens to me, but it happens to me as a manifester. And it looks like I'm initiating everything. It looks like I never wait. It looks like I'm always starting. It's not true. I know that. I know that nothing happens until I move. Nothing. That I manifest because there's nothing else I can do, because I am totally helpless in manifesting. And the 8% of us that are manifestors on this planet know the pain of that. Because you can't stop. You can't do anything about it. And everybody says, it's you. It's you. It's your ego doing that. It's your this, your that, whatever. The healing of the human ego, this is so important. Because I know the beauty of this energy. You see, those of you, I think all of you actually, who had your initial reading with me, that's when you met it. That's when you meet that energy. That's when you meet the pure ego energy that brings initiation. Because that's what it is. If that was a vain ego, no one gets initiated in that. Everybody just suddenly becomes competitive and says, oh, that's not me. No, that's not right. Because that's the reaction to imposed will, is resistance. It has to be clean. It has to be pure. And when that energy is pure, then the will to change and manipulate can be correct. And can be guided by a correct and proper energy. So in looking at this ego design, At the not self mundane level, this is my ego and I do everything. And at the transcendent level, this is we are the will of life and we are a design. You know, this is the answer to why. And you know how you know that you've got the answer? You smell it. Oh, this is so deep in what it is to be us. You got to smell it.